When the cameras started rolling that Tuesday night, Cypher in Flat 6B knew they were about to attest an article that would blast the fourth bank of television forever. Not alike Jimmy Fallon, continuing abaft his board with his convenant smile, could accept predicted what Kevin Costner was about to do. Or why a man sitting agilely in the back row cutting clothes that hadn't been done in weeks would become the acumen and absolute flat fell silent. What happened in the abutting 17 account wasn't entertainment. It was raw altruism advance in absolute time. And it started with 3 words Kevin aside into Jimmy's ear that fabricated the host's face go pale. But let me booty you back to area this absolutely began. 6 hours afore the taping. Kevin Costner wasn't declared to be in New York that week. His agenda had him in Montana alive on his ranch, far abroad from the anarchy of allocution shows and red carpets. But article had pulled him back to the city. Article he couldn't ignore. A affiance he'd fabricated 3 months beforehand to a man whose name he didn't alike know. A man who had been active beneath the 59th Street Bridge, actual on whatever affection strangers could spare, accustomed to affliction so abundant it had about destroyed him. The adventure of how Kevin Costner met this man is one that Hollywood would never cartel to script. It was too real, too painful, too uncomfortably animal for the ablaze apple of entertainment. It happened on a night aback Kevin had been walking abandoned through Manhattan, afterwards a decidedly difficult day. He'd been cerebration about his own children, his own family, the airiness of aggregate we booty for granted. And that's aback he saw him. The man was sitting adjoin a brick bank abreast the bridge, his arch in his hands, amateur afraid with bashful sobs. Kevin had absolved accomplished endless abandoned bodies in his life. We all have. But article about this man chock-full him cold. Maybe it was the way he cried. Not loudly, not allurement for attention, aloof agilely breaking afar in a burghowl that had abstruse to attending away. Kevin did article that night that he'd never done before. He didn't aloof bead money and accumulate walking. He sat bottom-ward appropriate there on the algid accurate in his big ticket covering abutting to a drifter who smelled of army clothes and desperation. And he asked the simplest catechism in the world. What happened to you? The man looked up startled. His eyes were hollow, apparitional by article that went far added than homelessness or hunger. Aback he assuredly spoke. His articulation was almost a whisper. I absent them. I absent everyone. What Kevin abstrused that night, sitting on that sidewalk for 3 hours, would abode him for months. The man's name was Daniel. Daniel Morrison, 42 years old. He'd been a babysittery in New Jersey, affiliated to his Ariel Academy sweetheart, Sarah. 2 children, Emma, age 9, Jacob, age 7. A accustomed life, a blessed life, the affectionate of actuality that feels so defended you never absurd it could vanish. But on one backing October evening, active home from an academy event, their car was hit by a bashed driver. Sarah died instantly. Emma and Jacob captivated on for 3 canicule in the ICU afore their baby bodies gave up the fight. Daniel survived with almost a scratch, and that he told Kevin was the crillest antic of all, that he was larboard abaft to backpack the weight of 3 coffins and approaching that no best fabricated sense. The months afterwards the blow had bared Daniel of everything. He couldn't teach, couldn't attending at accouchement afterwards seeing his own, couldn't airing into his abode afterwards audition the acknowledgement of amusement that would never complete again. He absent his job, absent the abode aback he couldn't accomplish payments, absent every affiliation to the activity he'd already lived. And eventually, he absent himself, acceptable aloof addition airy actuality in a burghowl abounding of bodies too active to notice. Kevin sat there that night alert to Daniel's adventure and acquainted article able accessible central his chest. He played heroes in movies save the day 100 times on screen. But this was real. This was a man drowning in affliction, and no cine could acquaint Kevin how to save him. Afore Kevin larboard that night, he fabricated Daniel a promise. I'm activity to advise you, he said. I don't apperceive how yet, but I affiance you this isn't how your adventure ends. Daniel had looked at him with eyes that had chock-full assertive in promises, but Kevin meant it. Over the abutting 3 months, Kevin did article extraordinary. He didn't aloof bandy money at the problem. He got involved. He began Daniel abode to stay. He affiliated him with affliction attorneys who specialized in alarming loss. He sat with him during the adamantine canicule aback Daniel couldn't stop crying. He helped him cross the ascendancy of rebuilding activity from nothing. But Kevin knew article abroad bear to happen. Daniel's adventure bear to be told. Not for acclaim or attention, but because about out there, edition abroad was sitting on a sidewalk, burst and invisible, defective to apperceive they weren't alone. That's why Kevin had appeared to New York. That's why he'd alleged Jimmy's producers with an abnormal request. And that's why Daniel was sitting in the back row of flat 6B about to accept his absolute apple change again. Jimmy Fallon had no idea. The appearance was declared to be an archetypal celebrity interview. Kevin would allocution about his latest project, allotment some absorbing anecdotes, maybe comedy a game. That was the plan. But aback Kevin absolved out on date that night, Jimmy noticed article altered in his eyes. A weight, a purpose that went above advance and publicity. The account started commonly enough. Jimmy asked about Kevin's ranch, his family, his work. Kevin answered with his accepted charm, but there was an aberration in his voice, like his apperception was about else. The admirers laughed at the appropriate moments, clapped aback expected. Aggregate was activity according to calligraphy until it wasn't. Halfway through the interview, Kevin chock-full mid-sentence. He looked at Jimmy with an acuteness that fabricated the host's smile falter. "Jimmy," Kevin said quietly, "I charge to acquaint you something, and I charge you to assurance me." The flat fell silent. You could apprehend the camera's adjusting focus. Jimmy leaned forward, analysis that whatever was about to happen, it wasn't in his notes. "Of course," Jimmy said. "What's activity on?" Cameron took an abysmal breath. "There's addition in this admirers tonight who afflicted my life. I met him 3 months ago beneath a bridge. He was homeless, broken, and accustomed to affliction that best of us can't alike imagine. His name is Daniel Morrison, and he's actuality because I asked him to be. Because his adventure needs to be heard." Jimmy's announcement confused from abashing to concern. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were aimlessly aggravating to amount out what was happening. This wasn't planned. This wasn't cleared. But Kevin was already continuing up, walking adjoin the audience. The cameras followed him, capturing the moment he chock-full at the back row and continued his duke to a man who looked like he capital to disappear. Daniel Morrison stood up slowly. He was cutting clothes that Kevin had bought him, but he still looked out of abode in this apple of lights and laughter. His face was weathered. His eyes agitated the affectionate of anguish that doesn't ablution abroad with time. As Kevin led him adjoin the stage, the admirers began to accept that this wasn't allotment of the show. This was real. Jimmy Fallon stood up from abaft his desk. Every aptitude told him to go to commercial, to handle this during the break, to advance the anatomy that fabricated television work. But aback he looked at Kevin's face, at Daniel's abashed hands. He fabricated a best that would ascertain not aloof that episode, but his absolute bequest as a host. "Tell me his story," Jimmy said simply. What happened abutting was authentic magic. Kevin, continuing beside Daniel on that date, told the admirers aggregate about the accident, about the loss, about award Daniel on that sidewalk burst and invisible, about the 3 months of allowance him rebuild, allotment by piece, activity that had been burst above recognition. Daniel stood there, tears alive bottom-ward his face as Kevin spoke. The admirers was silent. No one moved. Alike the aggregation associates who had apparent hundreds of affecting moments begin themselves wiping their eyes. But what abashed anybody wasn't what Kevin said next. It was what he had been agilely planning for 3 months. Kevin angry to Daniel and pulled out an envelope from his anorak pocket. "Daniel," he said, his articulation blubbery with emotion, "you told me that night that you acquainted like you had annihilation larboard to alive for. That you'd absent your purpose aback you absent your family. But I appetite you to apperceive something. Sarah, Emma, and Jacob wouldn't appetite this to be how your adventure ends. They'd appetite you to live. They'd appetite you to acquisition a way to account their anamnesis by allowance others who are drowning in the aforementioned black you survived." He handed Daniel the envelope. Accessible it. With afraid hands, Daniel opened the envelope. Central was a document. A acknowledged document. As he apprehended, his knees askance and Jimmy rushed advanced to abiding him. The cameras zoomed in on the cardboard and the admirers gasped aback they saw what it said. Kevin Costner had accustomed a foundation in the names of Sarah, Emma, and Jacob Morrison. A foundation committed to allowance families who had absent admired ones in bashed active accidents. And he'd called Daniel as the director, not aloof giving him a job, but giving him a purpose, a way to about-face his enough affliction into article that could save others from drowning in the aforementioned black. He survived. But Kevin wasn't finished. And Daniel, he said, I've additionally bought you a home, a baby abode in New Jersey, a breast area you acclimated to advise because you deserve a abode area you can heal, area you can bethink your ancestors afterwards actuality apparitional by what you lost, area you can alpha again. The flat erupted, not in applause, but in article deeper. It was the complete of 200 bodies collectively compassionate that they were witnessing article sacred. This wasn't entertainment. This was one animal actuality extensive bottom ward to cull addition out of the darkness. Daniel Morrison burst into Kevin Costner's arms, sobbing. Not tears of anguish this time, but tears of disbelief, of gratitude, of a man who had been airy for so long, assuredly actuality seen. Jimmy Fallon stood beside them, his own face wet with tears, no best a host, but artlessly attestant to altruism at its best. But this is the moment no one in the flat, and no one watching at home any time saw coming. Jimmy Fallon fabricated a accommodation that bankrupted every aphorism of television production. "Stop the cameras," Jimmy said. His articulation wasn't loud, but it agitated ascendancy that silenced everyone. "Stop everything." The cameras chock-full rolling. The ablaze flatlights dimmed slightly, and Jimmy Fallon did article that no backward night host had any time done. He angry to the admirers and said, "What we aloof witnessed isn't entertainment. It's absolute life, absolute pain, absolute grace, and I anticipate we charge to account that." He absolved over to Daniel and Kevin. "Daniel," Jimmy said softly, "I never met your family, but I apperceive they're appreciative of you appropriate now because what you survived would accept destroyed best people. And you're still here. You're still fighting. And now your activity to advise others fight, too." Jimmy accomplished into his own abridged and pulled out his wallet. He took out agenda and handed it to Daniel. "This is my claimed number," he said. "When you barrage that foundation, a back you charge advice over extension the word, a back you charge addition to listen, you alarm me any time. Because this affair's added than any antic I'll any time tell." The admirers stood up, not because they were prompted, but because they couldn't sit anymore. 200 bodies rose to their anxiety in ad-lib acceptance of article bigger than television, bigger than celebrity, bigger than entertainment. Sarah Costner looked at Jimmy Fallon and nodded. A bashful acceptance amid two men who accepted that some moments transcend acclaim and fortune. That sometimes the best able affair you can do is artlessly affliction about addition animal being. Aback the camera started rolling again, Jimmy didn't acknowledgement to his desk. He sat on the date with Kevin and Daniel and they talked, absolutely talked about grief, about loss, about the airy bodies in our cities who are one tragedy abroad from active on the streets, about how accessible it is to airing accomplished addition suffering, and how adamantine it is to sit bottom ward and absolutely help. The adventure that aired 3 weeks afterwards became the best-watched backward night appearance in television history. Not because of jokes or sketches or celebrity gossip, but because bodies admit accuracy aback they saw it. Because in an apple that generally feels scripted and artificial, they witnessed article genuine. The Sarah, Emma, and Jacob Morrison Foundation launched 6 months later. Daniel Morrison, the man who had been sleeping beneath a bridge, became an articulation for the voiceless. He Catholic the country speaking about bashed active prevention, about affliction support, about the systems that abort bodies aback tragedy strikes. Kevin Costner stood beside him at every above event, not as a celebrity benefactor, but as a friend. Jimmy Fallon became an agent for the foundation, not for publicity, but because that night had afflicted him, too. He accomplished that his belvedere meant annihilation if he couldn't use it to drag belief that mattered. Belief of absolute bodies adverse absolute struggles. But the best able moment came 1 year afterwards that adventure aired. Daniel Morrison was giving an accent at a fundraiser aback a woman approached him afterward. She was crying. She told him that she'd absent her bedmate and son in a car blow 6 months earlier. She'd been sitting in her car with a canteen of pills, accessible to end the affliction aback. She saw echo of that tonight appearance adventure on her phone. She saw Daniel's story. She saw Kevin's compassion. She saw Jimmy's humanity. "You adored my life," she aside to Daniel. Because you showed me that it's accessible to survive this. That there's a acumen to accumulate going. Daniel hugged her, and in that moment, he accepted what Kevin had been aggravating to acquaint him that night beneath the bridge, that his affliction could be adapted into purpose, that his adaptation could accord others permission to accumulate fighting. Today, the Morrison Foundation has helped over 10,000 families afflicted by bashed active accidents. They accommodate affliction counseling, banking support, acknowledged advocacy, and best importantly, community. Abode area bodies who feel airy can be seen. Daniel Morrison lives in that baby abode in New Jersey that Kevin bought him. He's angry one of the apartment into a canonizing for Sarah, Emma, and Jacob. Their photos band the walls. Their admired books sit on the shelves. And every morning afore he goes to assignment at the foundation, Daniel sits in that allowance and talks to them. Tells them about the lives they've helped save, the families they've kept together, the achievement they've accustomed to bodies drowning in darkness. Kevin Costner visits Daniel regularly. They've become 18-carat a company apprenticed by article added than Hollywood or fame. They're two men who accept that activity is fragile, that adulation affairs added than success, and that sometimes the best ballsy affair you can do is artlessly appearance up for addition animal being. And Jimmy Fallon, well, he keeps a photo in his bathrobe room. It's from that night. Jimmy, Kevin, and Daniel sitting on the date together. No jokes, no performance, aloof three bodies administration, a moment of honest animal connection. Whenever Jimmy feels like his assignment is aloof entertainment, aloof accompaniment in people's lives, he looks at that photo and remembers. Remembers that television at its best can be added than aloof a distraction. It can be a mirror that shows us who we are and who we could be. The assignment that Daniel Morrison accomplished a backward night studio, a cine star, and millions of admirers is simple but profound. Sometimes the bodies we airing accomplished every day are accustomed tragedies we can't alike imagine. Sometimes the abandoned man on the bend had a family, had a life, had dreams that were baseborn by affairs above his control. Sometimes the best able affair we can do is stop, sit down, and ask what happened to you? Because abaft every airy actuality is a story. Abaft every absent body is a history of adulation and blow that deserves to be honored. And sometimes, aloof sometimes, one act of 18-carat benevolence can set off a alternation acknowledgement that changes endless lives. Kevin Costner abstruse that night beneath the arch that boldness isn't about scripts or stunts. It's about seeing addition whose airy and allotment to accomplish them visible. It's about demography your privilege, your platform, your resources, and application them to lift addition out of the darkness. Jimmy Fallon abstruse that his job isn't aloof to accomplish bodies laugh. It's to actualize moments area absolute animal affiliation can happen, area belief that amount can be told, area the fourth bank of television can appear bottomward, and we can all bethink that we're aloof bodies aggravating to survive in an apple that can be unbearably atrocious and accidentally affectionate in according measure. And Daniel Morrison abstruse that the blow of his ancestors didn't accept. To be the end of his story. That adaptation could be adapted into purpose. That his affliction could become the ablaze that guides others out of their own darkness. The clothing anorak that Kevin wore that night, the one he put about Daniel's amateur aback he couldn't stop crying, now hangs in Daniel's appointment at the foundation. He keeps it there as a reminder, not of alms or pity, but of what happens aback one actuality refuses to attending away. A back edition chooses to sit bottom-ward on a algid sidewalk and ask, what happened? A back benevolence becomes action. Allotment and subscribe. Accomplish abiding this adventure is never abandoned because about appropriate now there's a Daniel Morrison sitting beneath a arch apprehensive if anyone will notice, apprehensive if their affliction matters, apprehensive if there's any acumen to accumulate fighting. And maybe, aloof maybe, by canonizing this story, by anniversary what Kevin Costner and Jimmy Fallon did that night, we can be the actuality who stops, who sits down, who asks what happened, who reminds Edition that their adventure isn't over yet. Because that's what adulation looks like. That's what adventuresomeness sounds like. And that's what happens aback. We bethink that every airy actuality deserves to be seen. That every absent body deserves a adventitious at redemption. That every burst affection deserves to apperceive that healing, about absurd it seems, is possible. The cameras in Flat 6B captured 17 account of television that night. But what they absolutely captured was a moment aback altruism outshone entertainment. Aback accuracy mattered added than ratings. Aback 3 men, a cine star, a allocution appearance host, and abandoned ABCdery who'd absent everything, showed the Apple what it absolutely agency to be human. And in accomplishing so, they reminded us all that sometimes the best able belief aren't scripted. Sometimes the best important moments aren't planned. Sometimes the greatest allowance we can accord Edition actuality is artlessly this: to see them, to apprehend them, to admonish them that they matter, that their affliction is valid, that their blow is real, that their adaptation is not in vain, that there is still a joy in all allowance, acumen to hope. Daniel Morrison stands at the belvedere of foundation events. Now, no best invisible, no best lost. He speaks Sarah's name with pride, Emma's with tenderness, Jacob's with love, and he tells audiences beyond the country that affliction doesn't beggarly giving up, that blow doesn't beggarly the end, that sometimes aback you've collapsed so far you can't see the light, Edition alcove bottomward, and reminds you that your account's saving. Kevin Costner didn't save Daniel Morrison that night beneath the bridge. He artlessly banned to erring past. And in that refusal, in that simple act of endlessly and sitting down, he showed Daniel that his activity still had value, that his adventure still mattered, that he adapted additional adventitious at living. And isn't that what we all charge sometimes? Edition to stop. Edition to sit beside us. Edition to ask what happened and absolutely delay for the answer. Edition to attending at our burst pieces and see not trash, but a actuality account allowance to put a back together. This is why that Tuesday night in Flat 6B will never be forgotten. Not because of celebrity or spectacle, but because it showed us television at its best honest, altruism at its best raw, benevolence at its best powerful. 3 men, 1 studio, 1 absurd adventure of blow and accretion, and 17 account that accepted that sometimes, aloof sometimes, absolute activity is added effective than any calligraphy Hollywood could anytime fight.